Hello, it's Dr. Shelley, and today's video is going to address what happened 3 days ago in Florida. Now, if you know anything about Florida and Texas, you know that you're really not surprised about this story, but here we go. We had a 67-year-old nurse of color beaten within inches of her life. Critical. She was beaten within inches of her life by a patient who jumped on the bed, beat her violently in her face, broke every single bone in her face, including probably destroying her eyesight forever if she lives through this ordeal. A day or so later, this patient was charged with a hate crime as well, because it was determined that he used several racial slurs addressing this patient's race while he was pummeling her and beating the crap out of her. Now, who was this patient? Well, this patient was at a hospital, allegedly there under what's called a Baker's Act in Florida, which is our version of pink slip or involuntary commitment. It sounds like he was a paranoid patient, with a psychiatric diagnosis, possibly, maybe undiagnosed, but surely showing signs of some type of psychiatric disorder that included paranoia. He beat her repeatedly in her face, and somehow he was able to get up from that beating. I don't know what happened to security, but he was able to get up from this beating and go throughout the hospital, and then leave the hospital, and then run throughout the streets until he was caught walking down the middle of the street with no shirt on and all this nonsense. This episode of workplace violence is probably the most noteworthy that we've seen in the media in the last few months. However, don't get it twisted. Leadership starts from the top, whether it's management at your hospital, your assistant nurse manager, your manager, the type of leadership that starts with the CEO of the hospital, the leadership of our country even, your president, okay? Don't get it twisted. It starts at the top. For example, I've been a nurse 40 years. I wasn't called the N-word until Trump got in the president's seat the first time. It was then that a lot of us, Black and brown nurses, experienced a huge increase in racism. In fact, I'm not just like imagining things. 65%, this is from Press Ganey, big shots. Press Ganey says that there's been a 65% increase in the last 10 years of nurses experiencing workplace violence. What happened 10 years ago? Yeah, there's always that. We saw some of this violence during COVID, where vaccines and COVID were made into political issues, which I've never seen as a nurse in my entire life. We had, for the first time, myself and my colleagues experienced these comments under Trump's first term, and the latest comment has been made just the other day during this term. And yes, I am blaming this climate of racism, because that's what it is. Okay, that's just what it is. Understand that DEI is the new N-word. Like, you can't ignore this. I mean, for crying out loud, the first week we were blamed, we, DEI, Blacks and browns and women even, were blamed for the plane falling out the sky. It's just crazy. So look, we hear comments like, no Black nurses are allowed to touch me or my family. We hear comments like, give me a nurse who can speak English. Yeah, that's our Latino sisters and brothers, our African sisters and brothers in the field, our even Croatian. My nurses tell me that came here from Ukraine, they've heard that. This just hate. Recently, this week, we had a patient say, literally, no DEI hires, please. I don't want none of you brown or black people touching me. This one is crazy, but I remember thinking, what do you do with that? You can't make this shit up. I don't want any black nurses touching my baby. Now, workplace violence and racism, they go together for black and brown nurses. Workplace violence is all of our concern as nurses. I want to draw your attention to this statistic. More than 80% of nurses have experienced at least one episode of workplace violence last year alone. Most are verbal or physical threats. 36% of nurses last year had been slapped, punched, or kicked. Now, I gotta tell you, the hospital that I work at is one of the best I've ever seen at it. I am happy to say that the Cleveland Clinic does not play around. They don't. They have a police department who is not going to tolerate this nonsense. I can't imagine this getting this out of hand where I work because they are on top of it. The nurse managers, the assistant nurse managers, even down to the charge nurse, they handle the business when it comes to workplace violence. We don't hesitate to call a code violet, V-I-O-L-E-T, violet. We don't hesitate to call a code violet. The nurses on our units are usually extremely supportive, and I'm talking about the main campus. I can't speak for any other hospital in the system, but I am so proud of where I work because they do handle this issue in a classy way that is remarkable, really. And that's only because I've been the victim. I've been the victim of this patient trying to, fight and calling me the N-word. And what really struck me, because to be honest, can I be honest? I wasn't even fazed. I mean, this is what I've dealt with my whole life in terms of just regular laypersons. But to have a patient do it was a little different because I got to tell you, I've been a nurse all these years, usually the only black on the unit. 40 years ago, remember? And I never got any of this. Again, leadership starts from the top. So when it happened, I was like amazed by how, oh my God, wonderful the nurses in management were. I remember one nurse in particular, Kate Rhodes, was not just addressing the issue at hand as management, but loving on me personally, making sure I was okay. And Katie, I will never forget that. And so I just didn't really even think it was that big a deal because this is what we deal with on a weekly basis in society. But it just hit my white colleagues differently. It did. And they were right there for me. And that's what I usually see. I want to tell you this. Moving forward, how to handle some of these comments. Whether you're the white nurse in charge or the black nurse in charge or the brown nurse in charge or the black or brown nurse that's getting these comments directed to you, do not let them see you upset. That's what they want. Just very kindly and nicely say, oh, no problem. No problem at all. Thanks for letting me know. And walk out. Don't try to fight this issue, right? Because that's when you're putting yourself at risk for injury. That is also when things might happen that get blamed on you. I remember a patient's wallet coming up missing, and it turns out it was never missing, but the black nurse was blamed for that. She was also searched. She was my student. That's how come I know. I remember that what you don't want to do with this situation is let yourself get in the middle of a, I'm your only nurse, you don't have a choice. No, please don't do that. As soon as this comment is made that they don't want a Black nurse, leave the room, go find your managerial staff, whoever that may be, your charge nurse, assistant nurse manager. Explain the situation. Generally speaking, and this is just what I've experienced at the clinic, they are very caring and they will immediately reassign. Now, here's what's really funny, just keeping it real. I got to keep it 100. I don't know how else to do this. Because on the unit, white, black, brown, male, female, are brothers and sisters, and we're pretty united. When they get that reassignment, it's usually a nurse that is really upset with them. She doesn't treat them wrong, but she does what little she can to give the care that they need, and she's out of there. No extra, no special, nothing, because she is not having it either. Because we're in this together. I told you that. All right. Now, you have to get good at de-escalation. I have found that some people don't know how to de-escalate the situation. And so I'm going to do a video on select all that apply de-escalation during workplace violence situations, right? How do we make sure that we've done everything we can to avoid making this worse, right? Sometimes there's no way you could have done anything. It's a psych patient, and they're just on their psychosis. Also, I want you to remember that when it comes to these issues that you see here behind me with the different comments for the Black and the brown nurses, that you don't want to take it personal. I do anticipate this escalating and these comments getting worse because, like I said, nobody even talked about DEI back in the day. It's relatively a new term in terms of being used in the media by racist people. The best thing we can do is, like I said before, stick together, be allies in the situation. Understand that what's happening to Black and brown in this country, it does trickle down. It will trickle down, and it has trickled down. You know what I always say, F around and find out. And I think we're finding out. Deuces. I hope this helped.